When I was young, we were always winning things in this country. We'd win with trade. We'd win with wars. At a certain age, I remember hearing from one of my instructors, the United States has never lost a war. And then after that, it's like, we haven't won anything. We don't win anymore. The old expression, to the victor belong the spoils. You remember I always used to say, keep the oil. I wasn't a fan of Iraq. I didn't want to go into Iraq. But I will tell you, when we were in, we got out wrong. And I always said, in addition to that, keep the oil. Now, I said it for economic reasons. But if you think about it, Mike, if we kept the oil, you probably wouldn't have ISIS, because that's where they made their money in the first place. So we should have kept the oil. But, okay.
I want to ask you about the rally last night in Florida that you referenced, where you called the President of the United States the founder of ISIS. You said it repeatedly. President Obama is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder. He founded ISIS. Do you think it's appropriate to call the sitting President of the United States the founder of a terrorist organization that wants to kill Americans?
He was the founder of ISIS, absolutely. The way he removed our troops, you shouldn't have gone in. I was against the war in Iraq. I was totally against it, even though I was a civilian, so nobody cared. But we shouldn't have been in Iraq. I would not have been in Iraq if I were president, but that mistake was made. It was a horrible mistake, one of the worst mistakes in the history of our country. We destabilized the Middle East. We've been paying the price for it for years. But he was the founder, absolutely the founder. In fact, he gets in sports they have awards. He gets the most valuable player award, him and Hillary. I mean, she gets it too. I gave them co-founder, if you really looked at the speech. I think you probably did. But he and Hillary get the most valuable player award, having to do with Iraq and having to do with the ISIS situation, or as he would call it, ISIL. He calls it ISIL because nobody else does, and probably wants to bother people by using a different term, and whether it's more accurate or not. Most people call it ISIS. He calls it ISIL. He was the founder of ISIS, and so was she. I mean, I call them co-founders.
Well, so not only do you not think it was an issue,
and because of the way he got out, as bad as it was that they went in, they should have never gotten in. He shouldn't have gotten in the way he got out. He shouldn't have gotten out the way he got out. It was a disaster what he did.
Today's threat to our national security is not a matter of military weapons alone. We know of new methods of attack. The Trojan horse, the fifth column that betrays a nation unprepared for treachery. Spies, saboteurs, and traitors are the actors in this new strategy. These dividing forces are undiluted poison. They must not be allowed to spread in the new world as they have in the old.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go on.
I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward...
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
And to continue to pile name upon some wall in the future for a strategy that has failed. That's the distinction. Sir.
I first and foremost want to thank you for your time. You spent a lot of time talking to us here today. I want to thank you for coming and being open and honest. You recommended a book to us earlier. I wanted to recommend a book to you. It's called Our Madhouse by Greg Palat.
Yeah, I have it, actually.
Yeah, he's the top investigative journalist in America.
I've already read it.
And he says you won the 2004 election.
Right.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? You won in 2004. In fact, there were multiple reports on the day of the election of disenfranchisement of black voters in Florida and Ohio. I'll ask my question. Thank you very much. I'll ask my question. I'm going to preface it. He's been talking for 2 hours. I think I can have 2 minutes. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to ask you my question. I'm going to inform people, and then I'm going to ask you my question. So there are multiple reports of disenfranchisement of black voters on the day of the election in 2004.
Right.
There was also voting machines, electronic voting machines in Volusia County, Florida, that counted backwards. So amidst all these reports of phony, bogus stuff going on, how could you concede the election on the day? How could you concede the 2004 election on the day? When in this book it says there were 5 million votes that were suppressed and you won the election. Didn't you want to be president? I'm not even done yet. I have 2 more questions. If you were so against Iran, how come you're not saying, let's impeach Bush now? Impeach Bush now before we can invade Iran. Why don't we impeach him? Impeach Bush. Clinton was impeached for what? A blowjob? Why don't we impeach Bush? All right? Also, were you a member of Skull and Bones in college and Bush? Were you in the same secret society as Bush? Were you in Skull and Bones? Thank you for cutting my mic. Thank you. Are you gonna arrest me? Excuse me. Excuse me. What are you arresting me for? Whoa, 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 whoa. Is anybody watching this? I'm not doing this. I want to listen to you. Get off me. Get off me. What the fuck are you doing? Get off me. Hey, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? What is going on here? What is going on here? I want to stand and listen to the answer to my question. Why are you arresting me for asking for help? Help! Help! Are you kidding? They're arresting me. What am I? I didn't do anything. Help me! Help me! Help! They're arresting me.
He's got a taser on his chest. I mean, this really is he's an idiot.
Hands behind your back. I think if everybody is this situation would come to
You don't have an option. Let me just stand up. Hold on your stomach.
And, you know, unfortunately, he's not available to come up here and swear me in as president.
Why are they arresting me? Did someone do something here?
Let me just
I'm
say
being arrested.
Because it's a very important question.
What did I do? Get off me. You know what? Get off me. Get the fuck off me, man. I didn't do anything. Don't tase me, bro. Don't tase me. I didn't do anything. Ow! 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 Let me go. Let me go. Let me go.
Why? Why are you doing that?
Oh my God.
Back up. Back up. Why are you doing it?
What did I do? What did I do? What did I do?
Come on, Papa.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret. Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code? I wish there were something secret I could manifest. 322, a secret number? There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction that he's taking the country. We can do a better job, and I intend to do it. And we'll be watching. Be safe on the campaign trail. John Kerry, thanks for joining us. And we'll be right back.
Our moral and our mental defenses must be raised up as never before against those who would cast a smokescreen across our vision.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it.
And so our outrage when we see liberalism in its hypocritical display, we're the ones who get the most outrage. And by hypocritical display, in my book I talk about, it's not that their economic stuff that makes me so angry, though it does. It's the cultural Marxism on the left that drives me crazy. The cultural Marxism that, in the guise of American studies at Tulane University, where I thought I was going to be reading Mark Twain and other great literary figures, I was inundated with rape lit my freshman in advanced freshman English. It was just, I mean, one book of victimhood after the other. I didn't even know what it was. I just was depressed. I'm like, is there a book that does not have haikus about rape? I don't want to read about rape anymore and oppression. It was so unbelievably depressing, but I didn't even know what it was. And when I graduated, and I started to realize that I graduated with less skills than I had entered, and the head of the American Studies department, who I liked a lot, sent me a survey when I was kind of figuring out that I was unemployable after college. What do you think of your American Studies degree? And I had so much free time that I actually started to read the books in greater detail than the first four pages of the chapter. You know how you would do that, like before you got into a class. And I go, who's Herbert Marcuse, and who's Theodore Adorno, and who's Antonio Gramsci, however they're pronounced, or Horkheimer. And I started to look into who these people were, and what's this word deconstruction, and what's repressive tolerance, and what are these guys? What did these guys try to do? This is my Glenn Beck conspiracy, Dana, in the book. It's this is my billboard in my head of what happened to American society, how a country that fought so valiantly against Marxist ideas when they were aimed at the economic pillar of American society. They failed because middle-class American values worked. People came here with a nickel in their pocket, and they'd say, hey, look, the boss is a really bad guy. We need to bond together and take down the owner. They go, no, I've got a widget that I'm working on that's going to make it so that we can make 20, things instead of 40 things, and I think I'm going to be able to create a company based upon it. The left was never able to be victorious in its argument. Sure, there was a battle out there, but America was not really susceptible to the arguments of economic Marxism. But the cultural Marxists, and especially Gramsci, came up with an interesting idea. Where there was Marxist-Leninist thought, which was the revolutionary impulse, there was this idea of gradualism. Gradualism meant that we can kind of do this thing bit by bit and think of this as the long march through the institutions. And the cultural Marxists from the Frankfurt School, those people that I mentioned, figured out it's the cultural institutions that we need to walk through the front door and take them over. And they did it to academia. The post-structuralist model is what it's why our children come back from Thanksgiving after you hugged them and you gave them a stereo and bought them the little cool refrigerator, and they said, I love you, Mom, I love you, Dad, it's a great thing, and they come back saying, why are we having Thanksgiving? Mom and Dad, you're oppressing Native Americans.
And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
There is a very strong argument that says that actually what happened in Paris today is a result, and we've seen it in London too, is a result, I'm afraid, of now having a fifth column living within these countries. You know, we've got people living in these countries holding our passport that hate us. Now, luckily, their numbers are very, very small, but it does make one question. You know, the whole really gross attempt at encouraged division within society that we've had for the last few decades in the name of multiculturalism.
I love honesty. I like honest reporting. I will tell you, final time, although I will say it when you let in your thousands of other people that have been trying to come in, because I am coming back, we may have to get you a larger room. We may have to get you a larger room. You know? And maybe it'll be built by somebody that knows how to build, and we won't have columns.
Today's threat to our national security is not a matter of military weapons alone. We know of new methods of attack. The Trojan horse, the fifth column.
Do you understand that? We get rid of the columns.
Denver, good morning, on our moderate line.
Good morning. I was calling about the comparison between the CNN Tailwind story and Gary Webb's story, which I've been following. I saw the interview he did with Gil Noble in New York a couple of weeks back. In fact, I'm looking at it right now, the transcript of it. The thing that concerned me, that disturbed me the most about the Floyd Abrams report in the Tailwind scandal was the degree to which it seemed like a lot of the errors to me that were committed by CNN were committed by editorial people, and yet the Floyd Abrams report virtually ignores that side of the story. And my question for Mr. Webb was, before the Mercury News backed off of your story, did you find that your editors helped you make the story be a better story, or did you find that they were partly responsible for some of the misinterpretations that later came out about it?
That's a good question. One of my favorite lines was when I would submit a story to my editors, and I was in the bureau about 150 miles from the main office, so you would send it up over your computer modem. I would hit the transmit button and say it's all downhill from here. I think, you know, I'm biased, obviously. I'm a reporter, and there's a constant conflict between reporters and editors. But in the case of the Tailwind story, I thought it was significant that the producers of that show asked for an hour. And to me, if you're going to accuse the United States government of gassing our own citizens, an hour doesn't seem like too much to ask to air this story. They got 18 minutes. And the criticisms in the Abrams report were consistently over things that were left out. Now, in my case, it was very similar. I mean, I had turned in a series. It was 4 parts originally. It was cut to 3, and a lot of the things that we were criticized for not reporting were things that actually had been reported initially and were cut out to save space. And I think, you know, that's a problem if you're going to do serious investigative journalism and you're going to do stories implicating the government in essentially crimes of state. You shouldn't be worried about, well, should we have 18 minutes or should we have an hour? You should give these reporters the time they need to do the story right. And I think a lot of these problems we're seeing would not appear. Michael Kramer, who is the executive editor of this publication, Brill's Content, will be our guest Sunday. And on page 115 is the Q&A looking at the CNN nerve gas retraction. And we'll be talking to him for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. That's Sunday on C-SPAN's Washington Journal, which gets underway at 8 o'clock East Coast time. Ridgewood, New Jersey is next on our conservative line. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Mr. Webb, I was wondering if you have ever gotten a chance to look into the rumors and reports that Mena, Arkansas was a major drug transshipment center during the 80s. I think that's been reported by Micah Morrison of the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and I think Emmett Terrell's also touched on this issue.
We also have an email from a viewer who asked the same question from Encino, California. What have you uncovered about Mena, Arkansas, and the Bush-Clinton involvement?
Yeah, the Mena story takes up about a chapter in my book, and the reason I included it was because what was going on in Mena, Arkansas during the 1980s was very similar to what was going on in Los Angeles with this Contra drug ring. For those people who don't know, there was a major drug trafficker named Barry Seal who was based his air fleet at Mena, which is a tiny little airport up in the mountains of Arkansas. And drugs were coming into the country. Seal was one of the biggest traffickers in the southeast of the United States during those years. And there were lots of rumors that he was flying guns south. And Micah Morrison from the Wall Street Journal really has been the only reporter to treat this as a serious issue and to actually do some investigation. There had been a story that was done a couple of years ago by Roger Morris and Sally Denton, initially for the Washington Post, called The Crimes of Mena, which took a look at Seal's personal records and drew a very chilling story about how law enforcement investigations into this drug ring and this money laundering operation were quashed. The Washington Post refused to run the story eventually, and it appeared in Penthouse magazine. But this is another story that the national media has sort of blown off as some wacko conspiracy theory. 2 weeks before my series appeared, the CIA Inspector General issued a report, which is still classified if I'm not mistaken, but the results were leaked to the press, and it said the CIA admitted that it had a presence at this air base in Mena. It admitted that it had done repairs of aircraft at this air base in Mena. And this is a story that sort of came and went. I mean, Jim Leach's banking committee was supposed to have done an investigation. It may have actually done one, and I don't think those reports have ever been released or his findings have ever been released.
If you've just joined us, we're talking with Gary Webb, who is the author of Dark Alliance. His father was a Marine officer, so you grew up throughout most of the country, right. I understand. Began his journalistic career in Kentucky at the Kentucky Post and also the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Spent 9 years in San Jose working for the Mercury News and has a new book out called Dark Alliance and is also working on another publication. By the way, I want to follow up on an earlier call
who had commented about an editorial that was written by a member of Congress, and I believe it was a former member of Congress, a Democrat, Ben Jones from Georgia, who served from 1989 to 1993, the former Hollywood actor, and he wrote in yesterday's roll call, "Mr. President, do the right thing and step down." So a follow-up to the previous caller who phoned in. This was used last night on either MSNBC or on CNBC's Geraldo program. New York City is next on our liberal line. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Yes, I've been calling about several things. What I'm interested in finding out, if you can, first of all, the Taliban was also part of the CIA cooperation, I believe. And I think the MENA thing, these are peripheral things that I'm just going to mention. The only interest people have in that is so that they can assign the blame to Clinton.
Who's that voice I hear in the back? Could it be Sarah McClendon?
Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Boland Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. The airport in question and all the events in question were the subject of state and federal inquiries. It was primarily a matter for federal jurisdiction. The state really had next to nothing to do with it. The local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based on what was within the jurisdiction of state law. The rest of it was under jurisdiction of the United States attorneys who were appointed successively by previous administrations. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.
Let's talk about what could be the most explosive issue of this campaign if the mass media would get a hold of it and do something about it, but they're covering it up. And that is you were talking about the government involvement in drugs. There have been government investigations, there have been private investigations, and we've interviewed a lot of people, ex-CIA people, who have talked about the CIA involvement in drug operations for many decades. It's public knowledge, though once again the media are not saying anything about it, that Oliver North and his people involved with the Contras have been running drug operations, cocaine primarily, bringing it back into the United States. And there are other investigations which show that George Bush's office, Donald Gregg particularly, and the people he was working with, have been supervising an enormous drug operation, which once again was sending illegal arms down to the Contras and elsewhere, and bringing cocaine and other types of drugs back into the United States. But neither the Democrats aren't talking about this. Now, are the Libertarians talking about this, and do they put this into the framework of the drug law situation that you're talking about?
We talk about a whole lot. Of course, we always have the trouble of getting the attention that we think it deserves. There have been a few Democrats have talked about it. Senator Kerry's office has done some work.
He's done a lot of the investigation.
Right, and I think he's on to something, and I think we've gotten some other information too, of course, that the CIA has given Noriega over the years $200,000 a year.
Oh, yes.
And they kept feeding him money, even when Bush was the head of the CIA. I think George Bush is deep into it, well over his head. Somebody asked me once if I thought George Bush knew about as much what's going on as Ronald Reagan. I think George Bush knew a lot more about what was happening in the CIA, because I think Reagan was probably more removed from it, I mean, just by his own personality and maybe his age or something. But I think George Bush, through his office and through the fact that he was a member of this, head of the CIA, I think he was very, very close to it. He knows exactly what was happening, and I believe the rule that once a CIA member, always a CIA member, and I think it's awful interesting. Can you imagine? It would alarm a few of us in this country if all of a sudden we knew that the leader in the Soviet Union would be the head KGB agent, and here we take our head CIA agent and put him, you know, potentially the head of our entire country. Unfortunately, I wish that we could get this information out, and I continue to talk about it, but I sadly believe that there will be very little said, which means that the Democrats aren't doing it. That means they're involved too.
They're involved also.
And I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, it was even some of it got reported in the Iran-Contra scandals. We did know that there were drugs involved, and they were selling drugs back and forth. I think that might be the #1 reason for the drug laws. I mean, they use and play on the good people of America to support them, but I think the #1 reason is not to have high prices for some two-bit drug dealer as much as to raise the funds necessary for governments to do illegal things, whether it's some terrorist government someplace or whether it's our own CIA to fund programs that they can't get Congress to fund. I think it's tragic, and the sooner we get rid of the drug laws, the sooner this would end.
They're not so much interested in the use of the airport for drug trafficking as they are to see if they can find another thing to tie onto his tail. My own purpose in calling is to really ask why there has been such a blackout of any information about Mr. Scaife. There have been no investigative reports. The newspapers are not interested in discussing it. There's been, it seems to me, my own conspiracy theory is that there really is a right-wing conspiracy to try to make sure that the Democratic Party is really defanged, destroyed, and the result of that will be that they can get what they're really after, which is the New Deal. It just seems to me that the same old enemies have gotten together with a lot of money. A lot of reporters are certainly in the loop. Many of them admit that they have been on the receiving end of help. The newspapers are now owned by right-wing owners, and the purpose is to get at public education, to get at the medical services to the poor, to get at erasing the environmental laws. Best way to do it is to make people so sick and tired of voting that no one...
We had lost that call. I'm sorry to the caller, and I apologize. That was my mistake. I inadvertently did hit the button. But you asked about Richard Mellon Scaife, and so I'll follow up and ask you to respond to the caller's comment. And again, I apologize.
I think that's a good question, and I believe that's who Hillary Clinton was referring to when she talked about this vast right-wing conspiracy to tar the president. Scaife is a very interesting figure in American journalism, and you know, when I was looking for stories about him, I saw a piece, I think it was the Columbia Journalism Review many years ago, that was a very definitive look at who Richard Mellon Scaife was. And I think it's good to look at the people who own the media. And I think I think Scaife has sort of gone unexamined. But it was, you know, there was that David Hale story for a while down in Arkansas where they talked about the American Spectator and possibly money being paid for people to become witnesses in the Paula Jones case. And Scaife got a brief mention in the media as a result of those things, and then the story just went away. And a lot of people laughed about Hillary Clinton saying a vast right-wing conspiracy, but I think there's something there worth looking at, and that's who owns the media and how much of it sort of reflects their ideological bent.
So you agree with the caller's argument?
I agree that it's an issue worth exploring, definitely, and the press has done a really rotten job of.
An email from John Andraco. I am appalled that you would have Gary Webb on your program. There he sits mouthing anti-government garbage about how Tailwind was stopped and how the question is still open as to what happened. He has no business on a credible program with his bias against the government. He must be a product of his times and a typical California nut. There have been too many investigations into the drug charges to have his idea promoted as truth. The moderator sat there, referring to me, and questioned him as though he believed this nonsense about Tailwind. Unbelievable for C-SPAN.
Well, I think as a reporter, you've got to have some sort of an anti-government look at it to cover them fairly. If you're pro-government, who needs you? My view is that when you're a reporter, you're supposed to be reporting things the government doesn't want you to report, not the things the government wants you to report. They have millions of people on the payroll who are happy to tell you all the great things that our government is doing for us. And that's fine, but it's not the press's job to be cheerleaders for the government.
To our friends here in the studio, Nicole Wallace, a veteran of the 43 Bush camp and the McCain campaign effort. I think that's fair. Rachel Maddow, Lawrence O'Donnell. Nicole, your take on what became of the morning session there at the end?
I feel like I've fallen down Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole here. I'm not sure how this is a committee with no credibility when they're simply reading from a stack of emails that were sent from one Democrat to another. And I couldn't help in listening to that most recent back and forth. My mind went to Joe Biden, who decided yesterday at 12:30 p.m. not to run for president. It was because of exchanges like that, where Hillary Clinton's closest foreign policy political friend and advisor was trashing Tom Donilon, calling him a babbling idiot, saying he was being mocked by foreign policy circles. This is a sitting Secretary of State in receipt of emails at best disparaging her boss and his advisors, and at worst sort of trafficking in really ugly smears against them. So we've been talking about politics all day. There are plenty of politics on the Democratic side as well. This is at the root of the Obama White House's distrust of her in the early days. I think where this started was...
Just for a second. You and I are friends.
Yes.
I have sent you emails that you would not be proud of the way that I characterize people who you work for, people who you have been associated with in politics. You shouldn't be held responsible for receiving those emails from me.
No,
Sidney Blumenthal was not Hillary Clinton's top foreign policy advisor. He was her old friend who didn't work for her.
What he said was the largest stack of emails in her unclassified system. We have to assume, as Andrea Mitchell reported, that there was plenty of intel she received that was classified, that we'll never talk about on television.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. That was briefed the way the president gets briefed, by two cool spies who just tell you stuff because they can't write it down. But the notion that somehow this is a Republican fabrication, this is her inbox.
But
and
how
you and
could she control what she
Well, she can't, but it doesn't make it a politically motivated line of questioning.
But it doesn't make it relevant to Benghazi.
But in the opening statement, they said that the question was, how was Libya policy made? It is certainly, you don't have to like it. 46% of the American public is not satisfied with the answers she's given on this matter. So it is not out of line to ask who influenced her policymaking. And obviously, she could say, I didn't listen to anything Sid said. I thought he was a creep. But it's not, it wasn't, the Republicans didn't put his emails in her inbox.
He's never been to Libya. He had no apparent influence on any policy decision. He had no role in government. He had no formal connection to anything involved here. And he says he has no idea what was going on in that country at the time.
Like your college friend, I did 8 years active duty service, 2 tours to Iraq. I had platoon of 31. I had 7 that were killed, 6 wounded beyond return. We got hit hard, and I know there's a lot of military, probably people in the crowd with military service members. And I'm anxious to get to the VA. You covering that? I'm not sure, so I wanted to get in there, and hopefully you can get to it. But I mean, I know that we've had.
Let's talk about the VA now. I'll come back to this.
We have loved ones that we want to hear about, that we care about, and I have met with many of these Gold Star parents and families, so I've seen them.
What do you think should be done with the VA?
I've seen them mourn, and the thing is that we had 4 lives in Benghazi that were killed, and your wife tried to cover it up.
Go ahead.
Going over those 4 lives. Those 4 lives, those 4 American lives. If someone lost their grandchild, their son, their brother, as I've talked, yes, I was a Marine. I was an infantry unit out in California. I was a Marine drill instructor out here at Parris Island.
Thank you for your service.
I trained every recruit, regardless of religion, race, color.
Okay, now can I answer?
All of them exactly the same.
He has a right to say. Yeah, and his criminal wife.
Let me answer. This is America. I get to answer back. You listen to me. I heard you. I heard you speak. They heard you speak. You listen to me.
Of the Benghazi.
Do I have a right to answer? I'm not your commander-in-chief anymore, but if I were, I'd tell you to be more polite and say
I wouldn't listen. I would just raise my voice.
You can't touch him.
I'm not resisting. But the bottom line is that I would. And I have put one up in the room.
Do you have... Wait. Do you have the courage to listen to my answer? Don't worry now. If you'll shut up and listen to my answer, I'll answer it. Look, can I just say something? That's what's wrong.
His mind has been poisoned by lies, and he won't listen.
Hillary lied over 4 coffins. 4 coffins. She lied, and she lied to those families. So all those families are liars? No, all those families are liars. I want to know. I want to know. Did she lie?
Will you give me a chance to answer?
What answer? Did she lie?
Will you give me a chance?
Did she lie?
No.
She didn't lie. Those families are lying?
Let's go through it. Will you listen
No, I'm
to
not
me?
going to shut up. It's my first. That's my first one. No, I'm not going to shut up.
Why are you afraid to listen to my
Yes,
answer?
I am.
Why are you afraid?
No, I'm not afraid because I know you're going to lie. Oh, don't touch me. Do not touch me. Don't touch me.
You gotta get him. Sorry.
She lied over 4 coffins of our military men. It is true. Go with me. She lied. She lied. She never fought for us. She never fought for us. She lied over 4 coffins. Yes, she did. She lied to our military. You're watching too many. Yeah, you need to watch the movies.
All right, you're asked to leave. You gotta go.
That's fine.
The natural resources of a country are the sovereign property of its people. They are not ours to steal or exploit in the name of our comfort, our corporations, or our consumerism.
They're ready for you, sir.
The third world is not a world apart, and the witness you will hear today speaks on its behalf. Let us hear the voice of that world. Let us learn from that voice, and let us ignore it no more. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Solomon Vandy.
I think maybe I'd answer it this way. I keep, in my frustration sometimes, you know, actually, if you count some of the things going on in smaller countries and all, there have been about 114 wars since World War II. But I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
You know what a shit barometer is, Bob? Huh? Measures the shit pressure in the air. You can feel it. Listen, Bubs, hear that? The sounds of the whispering winds of shit.
What the fuck are you going on about?
Can you hear it?
No, I don't hear anything.
Oh, but you will, my sorry little friend, when the old shit barometer rises, and you'll feel it, too. Your ears will implode from the shit pressure. You were warned, Bubs. But you picked the wrong side. Beware, my friend. Shit winds are a-coming.